I always trusted my best friend with everything, until the day I discovered he had been hiding the ultimate betrayal. It all started with a feeling I couldn't shake. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for almost 10 years, and though we'd had our ups and downs, I never doubted our relationship. We had 2 beautiful kids, a comfortable home, and a routine that, while maybe a bit predictable, was steady and reliable. But over the past few months, something had changed. At first, it was subtle. Emily started coming home later than usual, always with a plausible excuse. Work had been crazy, she'd say, or she ran into an old friend and lost track of time. But then I noticed she was on her phone more often, texting late at night and smiling at the screen in a way that made me uneasy. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I brushed off my concerns as paranoia. We were just going through a rough patch, I told myself. But as time went on, that gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach only grew stronger. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. I couldn't focus on the show. My mind was racing with all the little things that didn't add up. I decided to confide in my best friend, Jake. We'd been close since college, and he'd always been someone I could rely on for advice. Jake and I met up the next day for a drink. As we settled into our usual spot at the bar, I poured out my worries, hoping he could offer some perspective. He listened patiently, nodding at all the right moments, and then leaned back with a serious expression. "Man, it's probably nothing," Jake said, his tone reassuring. "You know how it is. People get busy, life gets stressful. Maybe you're just overthinking it." I wanted to believe him, but there was something in Jake's eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. After all, Jake had been like a brother to me for years. There was no way he'd steer me wrong. But as the days turned into weeks, my doubts only deepened. I started paying closer attention to Emily's behavior. She was more distant, more secretive, and every time I asked her about it, she would get defensive or change the subject. I could feel the distance growing between us, and it terrified me. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. Emily had gone out with some friends, and I was at home, trying to keep myself busy. I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. I knew her passcode, but I'd never felt the need to invade her privacy before. But now, I felt like I had no choice. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were messages from an unknown number, messages that left no doubt about what had been going on. My hands shook as I scrolled through the texts, feeling like the ground had fallen out from under me. The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't just anyone she was involved with. It was Jake. I was stunned. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just Emily's infidelity that hurt. It was the fact that my best friend, the one person I thought I could always count on, had been the one to betray me. I didn't know what to do. Confronting Emily felt inevitable, but I wasn't sure I could handle hearing the truth from her lips. And Jake, I didn't even know where to begin. The anger, the pain, the confusion all swirled inside me, threatening to consume me. The next day, I arranged to meet Jake. I didn't tell him why, but he could probably sense something was wrong. We met at the same bar, and as I sat across from him, I struggled to keep my emotions in check. "Jake," I began, my voice strained. "There's something I need to ask you." He looked at me with concern, but there was also a flash of something else in his eyes, guilt. "What's going on, man?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. "I know about you and Emily." For a moment, there was silence. The color drained from Jake's face, and he looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I could see the truth in his eyes before he even said a word. "I'm so sorry," Jake finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen. It just did." His words were like a punch to the gut. All those years of friendship, the trust I'd placed in him, shattered in an instant. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he have done this to me? To our friendship? To my family? Why? Was all I could manage to say. Jake ran a hand through his hair, looking miserable. I don't have a good answer, man. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. I know that now. But I can't take it back. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. A mistake? You think that excuses it? You think that makes it okay? You were supposed to be my friend, Jake. You were supposed to have my back. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm so sorry, but I don't know how to fix this. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, the wounds too raw. I stood up and walked out, leaving Jake alone in the bar. I didn't look back. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me. She must have known something was up, because she looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room as if she were searching for a way out. Where were you? She asked, trying to sound casual. I talked to Jake, I said, watching her reaction carefully. The color drained from her face, just as it had from Jake's. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Finally, she just sat down on the couch, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice muffled by her hands. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. The weight of everything crashed down on me, and I sank into the chair opposite her. Why, Emily? Why did you do it? She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I don't know. I was feeling lost, disconnected, and Jake was there. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. For a moment, I was speechless. The woman I had loved and trusted more than anyone had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and my best friend had been the one to help her do it. I felt like my entire life had been turned upside down. We talked for hours that night, but nothing we said could change what had happened. The trust between us was broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. In the end, we decided to separate. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that made sense. The pain of the betrayal was too great, and I couldn't see a way forward for us as a couple. As for Jake, our friendship was over. I couldn't forgive him for what he had done, and I didn't want to. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. I cut all ties with him, and I haven't spoken to him since. It's been a year since that night, and I'm still trying to pick up the pieces of my life. Some days are better than others, but the pain is still there, lurking in the background. I've learned a lot about trust, about forgiveness, and about the fragility of relationships. But the scars remain, a constant reminder of what I've lost. In the months following our separation, Emily and I tried our best to maintain civility for the sake of our children. The divorce proceedings were grueling, and every time we met to discuss custody arrangements or financial settlements, I could feel the tension between us. It was as though we were both trying to navigate a minefield, each step bringing us closer to an explosion of unresolved emotions. The children, of course, sensed the shift in our family dynamics. Our eldest, Michael, who was 9 at the time, became more withdrawn. He would retreat to his room after school, headphones on, shutting out the world. Our youngest, Sarah, only 6, started acting out in school, throwing tantrums over the smallest things. It broke my heart to see them struggle, to know that the family they had known was unraveling. I tried my best to be there for them, but I was also dealing with my own grief. Losing Emily wasn't just about the end of our marriage. It was the loss of the future we had planned together. All those years we had spent building a life together now felt like they were slipping through my fingers like sand. Jake had moved out of town shortly after everything came to light. He couldn't face the community that had once embraced him as my best friend. Our mutual friends were divided. Some stood by me, appalled at what Jake and Emily had done, while others tried to remain neutral, not wanting to get involved in the mess. It was a painful reminder of how betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, but entire social circles as well. But life goes on, as they say, and I found myself slowly adapting to my new reality. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. The quiet of my now empty home was deafening, so I often stayed late at the office, returning only when I knew the kids would be asleep, sparing me from their questioning eyes and the awkward silences that filled our once warm and lively house. Over time, I began to feel the need to rebuild, to move forward, even if I didn't quite know how. I started seeing a therapist, which helped me unpack the complex emotions I was struggling with: anger, sadness, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The therapist suggested that I try to focus on the future, on what kind of life I wanted to create for myself and my children. That was easier said than done. I spent many nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what my life had become. The image of Emily and Jake together haunted me, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. I questioned every decision I had made in our marriage, wondering if there had been signs I missed, if there was something I could have done differently. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I decided I needed to make a change. I realized that I couldn't keep living in the past, rehashing every painful detail over and over again. I had to find a way to forgive, not for their sake, but for my own. The anger and resentment were eating away at me, and I knew that if I didn't let go, I would never be able to truly move on. The process of forgiveness was not easy, and it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful journey, filled with setbacks and moments of doubt. But little by little, I began to find peace. I started by forgiving myself, acknowledging that I wasn't perfect, that I had made mistakes in our marriage too. Then, I worked on forgiving Emily, understanding that she was struggling with her own issues, that her actions, while hurtful, were not entirely about me. And finally, I tried to forgive Jake, though that was the hardest part. As I focused on healing, I also began to reconnect with my children. I made a conscious effort to be more present in their lives, to show them that despite everything, they were still my top priority. I took them on weekend trips, just the three of us, and slowly, we started to create new memories, ones that weren't tainted by the past. During this time, I also began to rediscover who I was outside of my roles as a husband and father. I took up hobbies that I had abandoned years ago, like hiking and photography. I even signed up for a cooking class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. These small acts of self-care helped me rebuild my sense of self, reminding me that I was more than just the man who had been betrayed. Months turned into a year, and life began to feel a bit more normal, though it was a new kind of normal. Emily and I established a co-parenting routine that worked for the kids, and while our interactions were still strained, they were civil. We both attended the children's school events. Though we kept our distance from each other, the wounds were still there, but they were slowly healing. Jake, on the other hand, remained a ghost from my past. He had reached out a few times, sending me long, heartfelt emails apologizing again, trying to explain his side of the story, but I never responded. I wasn't ready to reopen that wound, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. For now, it was enough that I had found some semblance of peace. One day, about 2 years after everything had happened, I was at a coffee shop when I ran into an old college friend, Lisa. We had dated briefly in our early 20s, but had lost touch over the years. Seeing her again brought back a flood of memories, and we ended up chatting for hours, catching up on each other's lives. She had gone through her own share of hardships, including a divorce, and we bonded over our shared experiences. Lisa and I started seeing each other more often, and eventually, our friendship blossomed into something more. It was different from what I had with Emily. Less intense, more easygoing. But it was exactly what I needed. Lisa knew about my past, and she accepted me, flaws and all. She didn't push me to talk about Emily or Jake, and she didn't try to rush our relationship. We took things slow, allowing it to develop naturally. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope. I could see a future for myself that wasn't clouded by the pain of the past. I was still cautious, still guarded, but I was also open to the possibility of happiness again. As I stood on the brink of this new chapter in my life, I realized that while the betrayal had changed me, it hadn't destroyed me. I had survived the worst of it, and I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I had learned to let go of the anger and bitterness that had once consumed me, and in doing so, I had found a sense of peace. Emily and I would never be what we once were, and my friendship with Jake was beyond repair, but I had learned to accept that. Not every relationship is meant to last forever, and sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who teach us the most about ourselves. In the end, I chose to focus on the positives: the love I had for my children, the new relationship I was building with Lisa, and the personal growth I had achieved. I knew that there would still be difficult days ahead, but I also knew that I had the strength to face them. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal had forced me to confront parts of myself that I had been avoiding for years. It had pushed me to grow, to evolve, and to find a new sense of purpose. And for that, in a strange way, I was grateful. Life is never perfect, and it's rarely easy. But as I moved forward, I knew that I was no longer defined by the betrayal that had once shattered my world. I had reclaimed my life, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. I thought my marriage was unbreakable, until a mysterious message turned my world upside down. It was a regular Tuesday morning when I received the text that changed everything. My wife, Anna, had left for work as usual, kissing me goodbye before heading out the door. Our life was steady, predictable even, and I had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. We had been married for 12 years, and though we had our occasional disagreements, I always believed we had a strong foundation. The text came in just as I was getting ready to leave for work. It was from an unknown number, and at first, I thought it was some kind of spam. But something about the message caught my attention. It read, "You deserve to know the truth. Check her messages with Sam." I froze, staring at my phone, a sense of unease washing over me. Who was Sam? And what truth was I supposed to know? My heart started pounding as I opened the messaging app, scrolling through my wife's conversations. I hesitated for a moment, feeling like I was about to cross a line I couldn't come back from. But curiosity and fear pushed me forward. I found the thread with Sam buried beneath messages from friends and family. I recognized the name. Sam was one of Anna's colleagues. They worked closely together on several projects, but I had never thought much of it. I had met him a few times at work events, and he seemed like a decent guy. As I opened the conversation, my heart sank. The messages were casual at first, work-related, but as I scrolled further, they became more personal. Flirty comments, inside jokes, and then something more. The further I went, the clearer it became that this was more than just a friendship. There were plans to meet up outside of work, discussions about feelings, and finally, messages that left no doubt in my mind. Anna and Sam were having an affair. My hands shook as I read through the texts, each one a knife to the heart. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. The woman I had loved and trusted for over a decade had betrayed me, and I had been completely oblivious. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, unable to focus on anything else. I replayed our last few months together in my mind, looking for signs I might have missed. Had she been more distant? Had she made excuses to be out more often? Every little detail seemed to take on new significance, and I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it sooner. By the time Anna came home that evening, I had worked myself into a state of numb disbelief. She walked through the door with a smile, the same smile she'd given me every day for years. I watched her as she set down her bag, kicked off her shoes, and came over to give me a hug, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. "What's wrong?" she asked, pulling back to look at me with concern. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and felt a wave of anger and sadness. "Who's Sam?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. The question caught her off guard. I saw the flash of panic in her eyes before she quickly masked it. "What do you mean?" "I saw the messages, Anna. I know about the two of you." Her face paled, and she took a step back, as if the distance would somehow shield her from the confrontation. "It's not what you think," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then tell me," I said, my patience fraying. "Tell me what it is, Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for months." She didn't answer right away, and that silence was the confirmation I didn't want but knew was coming. She looked down at her hands, her expression a mix of guilt and regret. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened." I wanted to shout, to demand how something like this could just happen. But all the anger seemed to drain out of me, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. "Why, Anna? Why did you do it?" She finally looked up, tears in her eyes. "I don't know. I've been feeling lost, like I'm not the person I used to be. Sam was there, and he made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time. But it doesn't mean I don't love you. I never stopped loving you." Her words felt like a cruel joke. How could she claim to love me while betraying everything we had built together? But as I stood there, staring at her tear-streaked face, I realized that the situation was far more complicated than I had imagined. Over the next few days, we had long, painful conversations. Anna explained that she had been struggling with her sense of identity, feeling trapped in the routine of our lives. She admitted that the affair had been an escape, a way to feel alive again in a life that had begun to feel stagnant. It hurt to hear her say those things, but in a way, I understood. I had been guilty of taking our life together for granted, of assuming that everything was fine because it was familiar and comfortable. We had both been coasting through our marriage, not realizing that beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The decision to stay together or separate weighed heavily on us both. I knew that I still loved her, but the trust between us had been shattered. We agreed to see a marriage counselor, hoping that with time and effort, we might be able to rebuild what we had lost. The counseling sessions were grueling, forcing us to confront the issues we had both been avoiding for years. We talked about our fears, our insecurities, and the ways we had both failed each other. Slowly, painfully, we began to understand how we had ended up here. But understanding didn't erase the hurt, and rebuilding trust was harder than either of us had anticipated. There were days when I questioned if it was even worth it, if the damage was too great to repair. I struggled with the fear that Anna would betray me again, that no matter how hard we worked, we could never go back to what we once were. Yet, despite all the doubt and pain, there were moments of hope. Small gestures, like a kind word or a thoughtful act, began to rebuild the connection between us. I could see that Anna was truly remorseful, that she wanted to make things right, and slowly, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick. The journey was filled with setbacks and moments of despair. But with time, we began to heal. The love we shared wasn't the same as before. It was more fragile, more cautious, but it was still there, and that gave us both something to hold on to. As we moved forward, we made a promise to each other to communicate openly, to never let things fester, and to always put our relationship first. It wasn't a guarantee that we would succeed, but it was a start. Years later, I look back on that time with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. The betrayal nearly destroyed us, but it also forced us to confront the issues that had been driving us apart. It taught us the importance of honesty, vulnerability, and effort in a marriage. Our relationship is different now, stronger in some ways, still healing in others, but we're still together, still fighting for each other. And in the end, that's what matters most.